Hello, hello. This is Pete Oslin with the Bending Rules podcast. Welcome to 2025. Excited to get started with you here this year with a guest, Mark Josephson. I will introduce him in a moment here. I just wanted to kind of take a few minutes and talk about going into 2025. And as an entrepreneur, I always use this as an opportunity to sort of consolidate the things I had done in the previous year. And I'm looking at the podcast no differently, right? Kind of what type of a cadence did I enjoy? Where do we get the most value? And as we go into 2025, there will be some things we recalibrate and focus on. And one of those is making sure I have entrepreneurs across all different industries. Obviously, we've had a lot of tech entrepreneurs, some in the manufacturing. We want to continue that trend and identify different sized companies, as well as individuals like we have on today, Mark, who was both, a founder of a company and then later inserted on in as a CEO for a couple of different companies. And we'll talk about that as in the introduction. So, I encourage you to do the same as entrepreneurs. I mean, January was always the month where I had my management executive offsites, and we kind of looked at our plans and thought about what we need to do differently. It's easy to sort of fall into your same habits and patterns and go out there and just try to sell and do the things that are expected of you, and that will always be there. But even that exercise of selling, as much as we are always striving for revenue, sometimes you need to slow down and not do that, right? And so, January was a nice inflection point for my business. I always looked at July as when we had our offsites. So I'm not here to tell you how to run your company exactly, but I hope you take the time to think about what you can do differently, and also give yourself a little bit of, pat on the back and success of making it through one year, and recognize you got another opportunity in 2025. So good luck with everything. Excited to get going, Mark. A couple of my co-hosts will be joining for other podcasts later. This one I wanted to do one individually with Mark, and so we're going to get going here right now. With me is Mark Josephson, and Mark, I'm going to just let you do a little bit intro on yourself. Oftentimes when entrepreneurs do intros, it's hard to talk about yourself and talk about all the great things you did. So, because there's a lot of times we have humility, but I was really impressed when we just had our short conversation. I know you became a CEO at Bitly, a well-known company that, for those that don't know, is very, in its first phase, very simple execution of taking long URLs and shortening them and making those accessible in social media and other sources. So I'm excited to hear about that aspect of your journey, but of course there's going to be a lot more to that journey. So again, Mark, welcome. Thanks for joining. Maybe give us a few seconds on yourself, and I'll start drilling you here any minute now.
I hope you bring the heat. I hope you bring the heat better than the Seahawks did against the Patriots, is what I'm going to say. But thank you for having me. It's a joy to be here. Excuse me. So I've been an entrepreneur since as long as I can remember, whether that was the paper route in elementary school, in middle school, to mowing lawns and sealing driveways, or I was the paper boy in college. I had the New York Times license on campus. So I've always been an entrepreneur, raised by two entrepreneurial parents. And my professional career has been in tech. And I started in the dot-com boom of the late 1990s. I've had 7 amazing jobs on my LinkedIn, 3 of which are CEO roles. And I've been a hired-in CEO twice. First was for a Union Square Ventures company in the local space called Outside.in, which we sold to AOL. The second was to be hired back to run link shortening company Bitly, which my team and I ran for 6.5 years, from $1 million in ARR to profitable and sold to private equity, and then 3 more years continuing to scale it. And then as a founder in this last chapter of my journey, for a company called Castiron, which we sold in the fourth quarter of 2024. And now I'm coaching CEOs and leadership teams of high growth companies full time, and am ridiculously passionate about the real people who are building real careers and real families and real lives in tech, because so much of what you and I know to be true, you have a hat on, but I've got a lot of gray hair. Like, there's things you can do better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I put my hat on. I take it off.
A little chilly this morning, so.
Oh yeah, it's freezing here. But there's so much that we've seen and learned, and I get so much joy out of sharing that. with the goal of helping people make better decisions, have more success, be happier, be more fulfilled, all of that. So I'm thrilled to be here today, and I hope you
You know,
bring it
I'm
more.
really glad to hear you. I'm really glad to hear you say that. And I think that's why you and I, when I met you and had a chance to talk with you, where it resonated. There's this, I've always called it an entrepreneurial code, and not all entrepreneurs maybe follow this, but I hope that they do. Is you, if you are fortunate enough to have some successes and likely some failures, to be in a place where you in your career where you're able to sort of share those successes, those challenges, and in the hopes of helping another entrepreneur, be inspired, avoid those mistakes. I mean, that's really what motivated me to start this podcast.
Yeah.
Having these kind of conversations and wanting to reach as many people as possible, and I do find many entrepreneurs think that way. So this isn't about us promoting anything at this point. We've kind of done our thing and gone out there and had our journey and success and failures, and so this is about sharing those stories. So I'm excited to get into that with you today.
Me too, Pete. I'll tell you that any successes that I've had of any scale are because of other people and what they've taught me and the opportunity they've given me. Any failures I've had are all my own, no doubt about it.
Well, that's a lot of humility that you're bringing into that equation, and failing is where we obviously learn a lot. But let's just kind of pivot on that for a minute then.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you're attributing some of your successes, I'm going to say some, not all, even though you said all. I'll go with some, to the mentors that came in your life. Where did these mentors come from, and how did you identify them, and why did they align with you? I always ask questions, and they're usually three questions in one.
Yeah,
So
I know. I could take notes, but feel free
answer
to
in
correct
any
me.
order that you want to answer.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that I've been extremely lucky to have a handful of people in my career, particularly early, give me opportunity and access, period. And I think I would stop there and I'll explain.
Okay.
I remember getting my first real job. I interviewed for an internship at a PR firm in Boston. The founder and CEO hired me on the spot as an intern, walked me down to the team and said, "Here's Mark." And they had no idea that they were getting me, right? And in that agency for a couple of years, we started to see internet clients come in. And I was given the opportunity to do something. So, look, I knew I have to work hard. I have to deliver great results. I have to sort of, perform. But I was lucky enough to be identified in that moment as somebody who could have the opportunity to do something, and that was amazing. One of my first clients in the internet space was a man named Scott Kernett, who became the founder of a company called About.com, which is where my next job was. And he knew enough to know that I wanted to be a CEO one day. And he said, "Mark, come work here. I'll teach you how to be a CEO." And he did. And I think mentorship is super, super valuable. And if you can, lucky enough to find, and I have more, and I have peer mentors now, and I have other career mentors who are helping me figure out this next chapter. But there's magic that can happen when you find somebody who cares about you to help you get to your next step, even though it helps them to accomplish what they're trying to do. But
Yep.
I don't know if I'm answering your question. I just think I got really, really lucky. Really, really lucky.
No, you're definitely answering it, and I feel that person saw something, you identified something in you to invest in you, as sort of seeing that you become a potential CEO. Is there anything like you would advise just from the outside in for an entrepreneur that maybe is seeking that mentor, and what do they need to do to go about finding that mentor? And because I want to say it's easier said than done. I mean, it sounds like it happened in a sort of a fortuitous way for you and circumstances, but I don't know because I feel like I talk to young entrepreneurs all the time, and they're kind of moving around and trying to get into, get product market fit or whatever they're doing. And
yeah, well, I have a bias. One thing I'll just say is I do think I was given the opportunity, but I had to perform. So there's no, oh, I'm going to be your mentor and you actually suck at your job. So like, I'm going to be nice to you. It's different. It's a different dynamic, but I have a bias personally towards small, high growth entrepreneurial companies in your 20s, just to paint the broad brush picture.
Yeah.
Because what worked for me was that I was in my agency was boutique, it was small, and the company I was in was small and then became very big.
Yeah.
And what that meant was I had an opportunity to play a meaningful role in the success of the business, outsized for my experience, my
Yeah.
skills, my resume, anything. And a lot of that was about my, sure, you need a certain level of acumen wherever that falls on the range, but I was
Yeah.
willing to work harder than anybody else. And I also raised my hand for literally every single thing, an opportunity, and pushed hard for that. So I think that my advice, that when I'm asked by my kids and who are now approaching the workforce and others, is to find a job where you can have a good day and then the company will have a good day. Like,
Yeah.
I had a conversation today with somebody who was asking me about a big company and would I have worked there. They were interviewing at the company, and would I have worked there 5 years ago had I known. And I'll share something that I don't talk a lot about, not because it's whatever, but I turned down a Google offer in 2003, 21 years ago.
Mm.
And I imagine that my career arc would have looked very different if I had taken that job. Certainly, maybe my bank account, but it wasn't even really a consideration for me because I didn't want to be at a company where I didn't matter.
Yeah.
I just didn't. And in
Yeah.
2003, there were thousands of people there. Now there's tens or whatever, or 100. I don't even know
Yeah.
how many. But I knew I wanted to be at a place where I could shine and I could drive growth. So just to double click on the advice is get to a company where if you have a good day, the company can have a good day. Choose the function or the number. I think about numbers in this context. The numbers that matter for the business. At the time at about.com, it was revenue. It often is. But I was like, give me the number. Give me the hardest number. Give me the biggest number. Give me a number. What's the problem that my boss needs to solve?
Yeah.
And I'm going to raise my hand and go hard at it. And more often than not, at that time, we were successful doing that. So, like, then opportunities open up for you. You have to create them. But I was given the opportunity to show up, and I tried to choose the things that mattered most for the business. I often advise people to find out what their boss's bonus is based on, because that's what they're thinking about, and drive that fucking number.
Yeah.
Pardon my.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is good because, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of someone entering their first phase of their career. Like, sure, you may have sort of entrepreneurial instincts, but without sort of some experience too, in terms of how building companies, you saw this as sort of a stepping stone, and then from there you kind of learn the skills as well. I mean, obviously you worked hard. There's white space for growth and things like that. You knew you could have a bigger impact. I think that's really good advice. I was talking to a gentleman just the other day, yesterday, in fact, was asking about kind of moving to my area and what opportunities were available in tech. And I go, you just got to get out there and network and go to the tech things, find out which startups are going. You may not get paid as much, but you're going to get in there. And very similar to what you're saying. I think that's the right way to go about it. Uh, I ended up going about it a little bit differently and struggled as a result, but in a similar fashion, found a mentor who believed in me and became our CEO of the first company. And then we continued on to have really good success. So, those inflection points are really important. But in the back of your mind, you're still probably having this entrepreneurial instinct. Yes, you're working hard, you're learning, you do this for 3 to 4 years. How many years you did this? What happens after that? You said you went and joined another company where it was one of your clients and that was
Yeah.
a startup?
Well,
Or?
I knew for me, entrepreneurship is about, yeah, I didn't always define it as starting something from zero. For me, it was
Yeah.
picking a riskier path, betting on myself. I have friends today who have big corporate jobs. I'm 52, my peers, and they look at me like I'm crazy for the risk that I've taken and the risks that I continue to take in my career and to do things that way. But I started in an agency. I went client side in the late 90s and had a really good run at about.com. After about.com, we had created a business inside. It was a search advertising business inside of about.com that we sold to Google, actually, and spun it out and sold it to Google. When that happened, two other amazing, important relationships, mentors and peers of mine. We went and started. We joined an Insight Ventures portfolio company. They were investing $14 million in a tier 2 or tier 3 business. We got installed as new management. We took that business from 10 million to 110 million. Wrote the S1, was going public, didn't happen. That's a whole podcast episode on itself. And I was ultimately president of that business, running go-to-market and BD and all that stuff. And that was a great run.
I'm not going to let you get away with S1 being a whole podcast of itself. S1 is a filing for a going public for those that aren't familiar. What year was that, just out of curiosity?
It was
roundabout
2005, 6, 7.
Okay, so you're in a relatively good spot at that time versus '08 trying to take something public. We can talk. You're right. We can go off on a tangent on that about market timing and things of that nature. Which, when I was entrepreneuring, I never really thought about market timing. It was always, I wanted to be informed about it. Where were the cycles in private equity and venture, and then you'd kind of get this instinct later on, especially I think as a third, fourth time entrepreneur, that okay, this is probably a good time for me to be entertaining this. But at least for the first 4 or 5 years, it's why even think about it, right? You got to go build a company.
Yes and no. Yes, because there's never a bad time to build a great business. And I don't think you should ever be thinking about building your business to sell it. I think you want to build your business and then hopefully someone comes and buys it. Doesn't mean you can't run a process or try to sell or anything like that, but it's just a fundamental mindset. But having lived through a bunch of cycles, the most recent one going from 0 interest rate to a high interest rate, the way that those, for example, the interest rate changes flow into the capital markets and flow into private equity and flow into venture. In my last company, I raised our seed round at the absolute height of the market where money was free. Was when you can borrow money at a 0% interest rate, which is what the world had. You imagine how that flows down to every entrepreneur. It was relatively easy to get money.
Yeah.
Which means you raise too much money at too high a valuation, and then you have to grow past it. And guess what? The door closed, interest rates spiked, and all of a sudden, that's why a lot of companies are going out of business. Because they can't. Yeah. The world is different. So I do think that understanding the market and the timing is really important, and being aware of it when you're running the company, because you have to be planning for what's coming.
Yeah, and so you're talking about your last company is sort of working your way back. You became a founder after being inserted, or as a CEO and a new management team on several occasions. So, and in those occasions, it sounded like you had some relatively good success. I do want to hear about some of those challenges that occurred in those, because we sort of gave the high points. I do want to come back to that.
It's still a couple of steps in the resume.
Yeah. But I also am like, why would you go do a startup after that if you've kind of had why go down to the seed round again? We all know how difficult that is. Uh-huh. I mean, you know what it takes to be successful there. I admire the heck out of it, because I've done that a couple of times and a couple of times I haven't. I've been in a later stage, the Series A or Series B. But the seed round is that's you're at the you're not even at first base yet. You're at home plate trying to figure out,
the seed round was the second. The seed round was the second round we raised. We had raised even a year before that. So it was. The real story is that. Let me hit a couple of quick bullets and into that deciding to start a company. I left the company that we almost took public to be a first-time CEO. I knew I wanted to be CEO. I had a plan and a map and goals. And I got it one step before I thought I would be able to get it. And it was for a company called Outside.in. The founder is a man named Steven Johnson, who's one of the kindest, smartest people I know. He's a famous science author and journalist. And we ended up selling that company to AOL. And after 2 or 3 years, I spent 2 years on retention at AOL, and then was recruited to run link shortening company Bitly. And my team and I ran that from 2013 until I left at the very end of 2019. And, in the middle, we sold it to private equity. So it was 3 years growing it and profitable. I was the third CEO to be hired. And then 3 years scaling it inside of private equity. Now, what had happened was I went on a year of gratitude and yes. So the year of
Yeah.
gratitude meant I was able to connect with everybody in my network and thank them for the part that they played in the journey and in whatever, and offer to help in any way I could. Don't need to pay me. How can I be helpful? Is there somebody in your portfolio? Do you know a founder who could use a conversation or a problem that they're chewing on? I'd love to talk about it. That started and turned into a small little side hustle coaching business, like coaching and
Gotcha.
advisory. I wasn't looking to do that, but that happened. The other thing that happened is I ended up meeting some really, really amazing investors who were passionate about a space, and I worked with them, and we looked at each other and it was like, oh shit, we're starting a company. And we did, and the company is called Castiron, and it is Etsy for homemade food, a marketplace for local and homemade food that we
Okay.
sold, that we built for 4 years. We raised at a really high valuation. We, struggled to raise our A round, but found a really nice exit for the company at the end of last year, and that has me now coaching full time. But I'll tell you, why did I start that? There was a bit of hubris in that.
Yeah.
There's a bit of, hey, I've been a CEO of early stage companies. I know what that's like. There's also a bit of understanding that I'd never actually really, really, really been a founder,
Yeah.
even though I've been in charge and been the boss. And I can tell you, it is very different being a venture backed CEO, being a private equity backed CEO, being a founder, or being hired in. Completely different, much more than I ever realized, and loved it.
That's really good to hear, actually. And I mean, can you, in some ways, summarize those differences? Like, what would you say are the one or two things across each of those types of essentially vehicles for investment? I mean, whether it's startup or private equity or venture, what's the biggest difference of being CEO in each of those incarnations?
Well, let's start from being a founder and a hired in.
Yeah.
In being a founder, I'll go chronologically. So for me, being hired in, and it was the first time for me, both times as a CEO, or first time and the second time, I felt empowered. I felt in charge. I behaved that way. And it wasn't until I became a founder and a founding CEO that I realized the difference between being empowered versus that empowerment coming from within, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of
I
sense.
was given authority and expected to in collaboration and partnership, but it's kind of bestowed upon you, and you have to earn it. As a hired in CEO, as a founder, everyone really is like, well, what do you really want? Like, what are you trying to do? Like,
Yeah.
what's the idea that you want to communicate to the world through this vehicle of this company? And
Yeah.
I certainly didn't work harder because I worked hard the whole time, but
Yeah.
the, I mean, real and um, general sense of ownership is just very different. Like it
Yeah.
was my baby. And when
Yeah.
you hire people, you hire different kinds of people who want to help you get that message out and get that.
But still, as a hired in CEO, you were able to drive the company and achieve really good results. And you and I were having this conversation, just in advance of the podcast of, you know, uh, why that was a good decision, and I'd mentioned that I had brought in a CEO on my first startup, and that was a good, ended up being a good decision. We had product market fit. So I'm thinking for the entrepreneurs listening, because they have to consider this, right?
Yeah.
They have to ask themselves, am I the person to do this right now? That's the first question,
Mhm.
and making sure they understand that I'm the person to do this now. By the time I got to 40 and I was on the fourth startup, some of which I started just like you, and some of which I hadn't. I knew then, like, I'm the person to do this. No one else is. This is the time. Now, if I had felt that way at 25, that's okay. Then I would have, then maybe that would have been the time to do that as well. So that's the first question. The second question is, okay, now if I'm gonna hire someone in, what does that look like? I mean, obviously there's sort of the cap table and the structure, and I think that's all sort of, there's literature out there on that. They can come to some understanding. But I'll tell you where I think I made a mistake as a hired in, which you seem to avoid. And I'm curious how you avoid this, and maybe there were some challenges. I'm curious what happened with that existing management team. The mistake I feel like I made, well, I loved your characterization, by the way. You were empowered versus the power within. is I have now come fundamentally to believe that the CEO, who's ever the founder, they're sort of the keeper of the light, if you will. I
Mm,
mean, they had the original inspiration, and the what I needed to do a better job was finding out how to pull out that inspiration and see a result and support it versus sort of running the company as a hired in with the metrics that I needed,
yeah.
which pipeline metrics, whatever they were, technology, all those other disciplines that are important, but I was never going to be the inspiration of the idea. Even if it become a really big idea, there was somebody that was the founder. I mean, the biggest example of this would be like Steve Jobs coming back to Apple, right? And all the challenges they had because he was so integral to the vision, and but yet he couldn't be managed in a way, so he had to leave the company, or they didn't know how to utilize him. So that to me is an art too, and the entrepreneur and this hired in CEO, that achieving that fit. I'm curious how you achieve that fit with your hired in experiences.
Well, look, I think there's a couple of things there. I think one of my superpowers is my ability to connect with people and find constructive ways to work together. I love it. I am so genuinely interested. It's why I'm like counting the number of people behind you in that picture. I want to know where that was where that painting is from. Like I want to know like I'm genuinely interested. And
Yeah,
um and so and I have a really strong ego, but not so strong that like I need to be like I'm fine with like Steven Johnson being the star of Outside.in. Like that was great because he's a fucking superstar, right? Like as long as we can
yeah,
accomplish the goals we want to hit. But I think that there's a moment for many companies and many founders, and Pete, I hope I have you on my podcast. It's called Critical Moments, right? There's a critical moment in a company's life cycle where the founder or the founding team who built the original product. So there's the product, but then that moment when they realize that the company is now a product. And
yeah,
the difference between building an incredible product that is loved by customers, product market fit, engagement, retention, net promoter, everything is like working. But all of a sudden, you need to build a company around that. And the valuation and the outcome and the sort of day to day is around building a company and running a company to fulfill that mission of the product that you built.
yep,
And
yep,
as I'm saying this, I'm thinking a couple of things. One, I still would bet on the product driven founder 1,000 times in a row because goofballs like me come in and be like, let's put in your operating cadence. Like, okay, let's stay focused on the customer. Let's like deliver results. So I think that's really important. And I also think that I know that in venture and in tech, there is a very real bias to support the original founders of the business.
yeah,
Private equity less so, but the right private equity has that also, but sort of more
yeah,
outcome oriented. And that's why, like, and as I'm thinking about this and you're helping me think this through, it's maybe why I'm coaching for that moment because I do have such an affection for and admiration for founders. And when I was saying before why I decided to become a founder, there was really part of me that was like, gosh, I want to try that because that's so hard, and I'm so
yeah.
impressed with the people who've really done it successfully. So I want to help them do that.
That makes a lot of sense why you circled back to that. Professionally, it's something that you just had to do. I mean, it was part of your life journey
Yeah,
plan to say, okay, I started something from scratch, win, lose, or draw. I wanted to know what that journey would look like. I mean, you benefited from the fact that you had operated companies at early stage, as early as 1 million, and kind of grown them, up, so to speak, and found an exit. So you sort of had kind of reversed it in some ways and had the experience of the exit and what that looks like. But I now I understand why you'd want to scratch that itch. And when you're kind of talking to other entrepreneurs, and a lot of entrepreneurs I have on this podcast, that's why I really love having entrepreneurs on that have succeeded and failed, done, kind of gone about it, because unless you've done that, it's very hard to relate to it.
yeah,
Right. Especially the starting piece of something, because it is so dark and it's on a piece of paper. Now, you got it financed pretty quickly. You're in a room with trusted advisors. I mean, so maybe you facilitated that a little bit differently, but even so, getting the first customer, how difficult that is, and the trust that needs to be built, and I'm sure you have a lot to offer now to entrepreneurs that you coach in that regard. What that looks like, and how you identify those wins, and
Well, I think
how you get financing.
yeah. Well, look, I think I'd be wrong if I didn't say I come from like a tremendous place of privilege in that I was raised by entrepreneurial parents who told me there was nothing I couldn't do or accomplish, and that they would support me if I ever needed it in any way I needed it. Right. And so I came from like a, a real place of privilege to go take risks. And I am I worked really hard to build a network. I worked really hard to build a reputation. I worked really hard to deliver results. There's nobody who worked harder than me. And I raised money as a 30 and 40-year-old white man in New York City in tech. Like, okay, you know, there's a
Yeah,
lot of people who don't have access to that. There's a lot of people who are smarter than me, working actually much harder than I ever have or will, with better ideas that could be better businesses. And actually, a big part of the last business Castiron was how to empower entrepreneurs who don't have access to the easy button or the resources that I did and have had. And so I think that the answers, even though that you mentioned there's literature out there on like how much equity should a hired in CEO get and how do you manage your cap table and all that stuff, there's it's just not evenly distributed, the opportunity and
yeah,
the access. So some of my favorite clients I work with are people with different kinds of backgrounds who, but for like having, you know, if they grew up in the valley or if they
yeah.
had the luck of being born in a certain place at a certain time, would be Steve Jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's again, part of your humility in identifying that, and then, recognizing that that contributes to your success, and I think an honest assessment of that sort of, that sort of blessing. One thing I was just kind of going back to when you were this notion when you were inserted as a CEO and you had this, your management team. What happened in those companies where they felt like they needed to do that? Because obviously they had CEOs before, and Bitly was started and had grown, and there was this good idea. Why weren't those CEOs, from your understanding coming into the
Mhm.
situation, why weren't they able to continue to succeed with that company?
So using Bitly as an example, there was two CEOs before me, and both smart, both good people. I don't have a bad word to say about either of them. The business that my team and I inherited had massive global use. Like we're talking about billions, not millions, of people and links and clicks and all that stuff. But it was at about $1 million in ARR and burning hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. And one of the things, this is another podcast episode, but like Bitly, while we shortened links and now they do QR codes and do some really interesting, innovative stuff, there's real, like, we locked ourselves in the room with the whiteboard. There are 50 unbelievably cool things you could do with knowing how the world surfs and looks at the internet and what data is flowing through all that. There's like really cool shit in there that's, you know, really, really could be powerful. And I was hired at a time where we had like there were real constraints on what we could do or should do. There were investors who were in the business for a while, were not looking to put more money in with the way the business was performing. There was a limited amount of runway, and there weren't a lot of choices. I've often said the choices that I had to make at Bitly in the first year and a half were really easy. Should we
Yeah,
charge for the product or not charge for the product? Honestly, we're going to charge
yeah,
for the product. Should we
yeah,
charge a little or should we charge a lot? Let's charge a lot, right? Um, and do we want to burn a lot of cash or do we want to get profitable? We have to get profitable. So when you think about the constraints that were on the business, I was blessed with those constraints, is how I think about it.
yeah,
The art of the possible of the previous CEOs, they probably were thinking about, a much different outcome, a much different trajectory. I was the GSD guy. I was the get shit done
yeah,
guy to make that happen, and maybe. And that You haven't asked this question, but you've sort of skated around a little bit. I think there were, let's say there were 45 people at Bitly when I joined. We turned over 42 of them in my tenure. Like, it's a different chapter, different needs,
Yeah.
different stages, different strengths, different, like, a lot of different things that you have to do. That didn't happen at the first company, but there it did for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And those different expectations that sort of came with that phase of the company, right? That people will naturally self-select out of that. Well, that was a good sort of characterization of that. I mean, I always say you're as good as your options too. So when you're presented a scenario like that, you can talk all day about, I want to do this, I want to do that. There's 50 ideas that we could pursue, but as a way you sort of explain it, when you're burning a few $100,000 a month and you don't have people willing to put in more money, then or the valuation just doesn't make sense, then you got to figure out the path that you obviously figured out. So, and I think that it sounds like that was a tough adjustment for, I mean, I think you referred to it as like the company of possibilities, like, to readjust or recalibrate in that sense. I mean, that's what I took away from that. So that's sort of bringing in a CEO more in an, I would call it kind of an emergency situation. Like, hey, we need to turn this thing, we need to find an outcome for it. I'm also thinking about the entrepreneur that's maybe a couple of years in, 2 or 3 years in, they're a really smart product guy, gal. What is it that what should they be looking for in a CEO at that stage? And can you give them any advice on where to find this person even?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's a tough, I mean, that's, they probably recognize, to some of them, I would expect that they recognize that they need the help, but then getting it, what does that look like even?
Well, let's start with understanding what our founder really loves to do and what she's really good at and where she gets oxygen and energy from. So there are amazing CEOs who never wanted to be a CEO. I have CEOs now I coach who are like, I have never wanted to be. I still don't want to be, but I'm the one. It was my idea. I don't really trust anybody else to do it. And it's why they hire me, right? It's like, help me
Yeah.
be a better CEO, a good enough CEO, the best CEO of what they're trying to do. And I think there's never, you're never wrong if you're following what's true in your heart and in your brain. If you don't want to be a CEO or you don't think you're the one to do it, then I would lean in.
Yeah.
I would give that some space and like talk to some trusted people, whether it's your advisors, your mentors, your coach, whatever, and say, is that true? What's the gap between how I feel and the facts? The facts are,
Yeah.
I'm of the mindset that you can learn to be a great CEO. It is a skill.
Yeah.
And so, first understanding whether or not that's what you want to do and if that's the right decision. And if you don't, and if you choose that you want to hire a CEO or bring somebody in, I would think about them as a partner, not a boss. But if you're the founder and you own most of the company, they're a partner. I would think about the skills really that you have and the things you want to spend your time on, and then everything else, and try to find somebody who matches up really well with you, like a puzzle piece that on your strengths versus their strengths and where they're going to run.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Investors are the best place to find people to do this, but also good old outbound, as you if you put together a profile on your in your head on a piece of paper on a note on your screen about the kind of experience that somebody would have. So for example, and then you go find that person. So for example, let's say you're making widgets, a new version of a widget that is for vertical in let's call it the um, real estate vertical, making that up, right? And you're like, oh, I have a new way to do that, but we're going to sell to real estate agents. Again, I don't know, good idea, bad idea, whatever. But you might want to find somebody who has built and run a company in that space before, or brings a tremendous network in that
Yeah.
space before, or has been a great sales leader in that space before, or somebody who can complement your strengths and weaknesses in service of the business opportunity.
Yeah. Yep. Essentially get those puzzle pieces working together. No,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And finding the right puzzle piece to create that sort of chemistry. And that means understanding, really what you are and aren't good at, and recognizing where your skills are going to be most valued at the stage that you're at too. And for me back then, when I brought in the CEO, it was really on the sales side and business development. I knew that if I was doing this 100% because I understood the product the best and how to articulate it, I was fine giving up the management responsibilities, the fundraising responsibilities. I wanted to learn about that stuff,
Mhm.
and so it does create that good mentoring opportunity. Okay, so I want to I want to shift a little bit here because I want to know about in each of these stages, like, well, one, when you founded your company, that's one sort of scenario, or not stages,
Mhm.
scenarios. The other scenarios where you came as management, what were your biggest, like, looking back, like your challenges that you had and your failures? Like, so, because even if ultimately you wound up perhaps having success with some of those and all those, it maybe perhaps I had a startup that didn't succeed at all. We had to close it down. I can talk about that for 30 minutes. I'm not going to,
Mhm.
but that's for maybe for your pod or
Yeah.
another discussion. But I do think it's important to help people understand like what were the biggest challenge you had, because sometimes it is financing for somebody, but it's different for everybody. So maybe you can tell me about, in those places where you hadn't done it before and you had to grow and learn. Tell me what happened, man. What what was the near death experience for the company, or did you
Oh
have
my
one? Maybe
God.
you didn't
I
have
had near death experiences at every one of those companies. Like for sure. And I'm just looking at the gray hairs, and the receding hairline is like proof of that. But Outside In was a really great idea. That in 2008, there was a couple of things happening. There was um, iPhone came out in 2008. You have to remember, right? And it was a gorgeous,
Yeah,
incredibly underpowered thing. But the thought of having a computer in your pocket everywhere was brand new. The I'm not counting a BlackBerry or the Palm Pilot, all things that I had, but that's something
yeah,
I have lying around here somewhere. But And then there was also an explosion of self-published content. So blogging was a huge thing then, and really exploding. Twitter was like kind in a good, safe, wonderful place at that time in burgeoning. And the idea around Outside.in was to build a consumer application essentially for the iPhone that took all the news and information and data sources and geolocated it so you could walk around and experience the world around you based on where you are in the news and what's happening and all that. Great
hmm,
idea. Um,
yeah.
the
I like it.
uh, I mean, there were so many things that were life or death in that company. It was 2008, 2009. The financial markets were horrible. We had great investors, but we also had a lot of angel investors, high net worth individuals. I inherited that round of investors, subsequently raised again. But um, uh, I remember one day we were closing a bridge round or something to keep going, and we had an investor who was putting in $400,000, meaningful for a team of 20 people, or maybe it was 15 at the time. And
Absolutely.
the Polish telecom market crashed, and he was a major investor in the Polish telecom. And he's like, "I need to prop up the Polish telecom market, or I'll lose billions or whatever the number was, versus this little
Yeah.
rinky dink venture thing for a phone that may or may not ever work, right?" Like, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I just lost $400,000 because of the Polish telecom market crash." Like, whoever, like, that was never on my scorecard. And
Yeah.
so ultimately, in different scenario, we had to figure out a way to monetize. And we turned that from a consumer application to a B2B SaaS platform that we sold to media companies. And we raised a strategic round from CNN, powered neighborhood news pages on all of CNN, sold big ticket deals to lots of companies, and ultimately were acquired by AOL. Whew, Bitly, gosh, we were burning cash like nobody's business, and so I had to make really hard decisions to make that happen.
Yeah.
Um, I'm thinking of a couple of things that are flooding back to me that are definitely, I think I'll say for my pod one day.
Repressed memories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm having a little PTSD. But like, we hit a cash crunch at one point, a very real cash crunch, kind of at a surprising moment, and an
Yeah.
act of maybe not my best management. But we had to go and pull together like a bridge round really, really quickly to keep the company floating. And that was like humbling and hard. And it turns out the people that supported us in that moment made a lot of money. And so that worked out okay when we sold the company. Cast Iron, oh my God, that was so hard. Like, you know,
Castiron being the one that you founded,
yeah,
you were
the
part of
founding,
you're the CEO founder.
yeah,
Yeah.
because, and so again, that was, it is Etsy for homemade food. And we tried so hard to find the right customer there and the right business model and pricing model. And it's a huge, billions of dollars are spent. Think of like the Christmas cookies or the cupcakes you get from the or the birthday cake from the woman who makes the most amazing birthday cakes in your neighborhood. Like we had all of those people. They're just really hard to build a business on. And so I fell in love with the customer and not the business. Love the
Mm.
customer for who they are and their challenges and the things they needed and the problems we could solve. But like, hey, pay me $30 a month for it. And they're like, no way. Right. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, God, that dissonance of caring so much for them, but at the same time, just getting really frustrated because you're adding so much value, but they don't have pockets that like they don't have
Yeah.
budgets. So
Their margins are so tight. Yeah.
yeah, and so I don't think I'm going to start something ever again like this. But if I did, I'm not selling to individuals. I'm selling to businesses. I'm selling to businesses with budgets. I'm going to sell to businesses with big budgets because they have to spend money, and they do. So, I mean, God, and we're not even talking about the people I hired, the people I managed well, the people I managed poorly, the great hires, the poor hires, the rough
Yeah.
exits, the friendships and relationships that get mingled and get like torn up only to get fixed 5 years later, like all of that stuff. All of
Yeah.
that stuff. The
Yeah.
HR issues, Pete. Oh my God, the stuff that happened in the company, the things you see people do, the choices you see them make. I mean, that's a whole
Well,
season.
and that's why I think, I mean, I mean, that was perfect because I feel every entrepreneur needs to know, like you pick up the paper and you see the story, you see the outcome, or you maybe even use the product, and you're like, oh, this is a great product. But all there's all these common patterns along the way that are expected to happen. And the more that you can expect those things to happen, even though obviously you don't want some of those things to happen, and you can learn and you can go and move forward, then you're more likely to kind of get through that cycle. But so it takes this tremendous amount of grit and resilience, and that kind of brings. I could tell you have that, or else you wouldn't have got through that. So I mean, as far as character traits are concerned, and you're now an angel investor, what kind of traits are most important to you when you are looking at a company that you may seed or that even that you're advising, you choose to spend time advising
Yeah.
over another
Well, let
one.
me
I
tell
mean, what are
you
you
that
looking
it
for?
is not easy. And there were moments, there was a moment at Outside In when I was living in New Jersey. The office was in Brooklyn. So if you know New York City, you know that to get from New Jersey to Brooklyn, you have to take the New Jersey Transit through the tunnel of the Hudson River into Penn Station. And then to get to Brooklyn, you have to
Yeah.
get to another train and go under the East River and get to Brooklyn, right? Two kids at the time, now three, really young. I was the first one in the office, the last one to leave. Had work, which was like trying to figure out how to be a CEO, what people needed to see from me, how to build a successful business. The Polish telecom market was crashing. The potash and commodities market, that was a whole nother thing that happened. Like, who the fuck knew that was a thing? Um, and, you know, I'm trying to be a good father and husband in a young family. And my parents were old and aging and not doing well. And there was a day, Pete, when I couldn't physically get out of bed. And it wasn't because I had a
Yeah.
muscle pull or a bad back. It was because
Yeah.
my brain and everything like just stopped me dead in my tracks. Like,
Yeah. It was the true burnout,
oh,
or the,
it was clinical. I mean, it was like the real thing.
yeah.
So it's really hard. I don't want to like grit doesn't, it sounds really good, but man, it's really, really hard. And I know a lot of people deal with those things. Um, I think things that attract me, I'm sure I'm an angel investor, but I'm not a great investor because I fall in love with entrepreneurs. I really do. I fall
Yeah.
in love with the people
Yeah.
more than I do with the idea. There's all these ideas are great, and like most of them are anyway. And there's not a lot of new ideas, honestly. They're just different versions of the same thing, but often. Um, I think that I think I mean, you talked about grit. Like you're gonna, and I would have said that if you didn't ask. Grit is being able to be told no 100 times and still getting up on day 101. I
Yep.
think that humility is really important, and knowing that you don't know everything and that you can learn and grow from talking to other people. But conversely, the confidence and certainty that you have and see in the outcome that you're going to deliver and that the world needs it. Um, and actually, if I were organizing the story better, I would say the ability to hold different thoughts, contradicting thoughts at the same time, right? Um, Actually, there's a great quote which I'll mismanage, but it's by my poet of choice, Bruce Springsteen, at a speech he gave at South by Southwest 10, 15 years ago, where he said something to the effect of, being a rock star is knowing you go out every night to bring it and like rock the house and deliver the most amazing experience you possibly can, and at the same time knowing you suck, and holding both of those things in your mind at the same time, because it's
Yeah.
just rock and roll. And like
Yeah.
that really is the nature of being a tech CEO, is holding at least two things in your head at the same time. We are going to kill this. I am entirely certain that it's going to happen. I see all the steps that need to happen. And oh my God, I suck. This is so hard. And
Yeah.
balancing those two things are really is the juggling act of being a CEO.
Well, and I guess, we're going to be bumping up against our time here a little bit, but the other thing that to me, sometimes I feel may intimidate people about the process, or entrepreneurs about the process, is this sort of commitment and the all in that you need to have, and the stress that it's associated with that, because it's hard to avoid. But on the other hand, I want to have people be encouraged that they can also live a balanced life, or learn to live. And I'm just saying from my own experience, my first time, the first company I started, I don't feel like I had that balanced life. I mean, I kind of really worked hard, but then I just would go work out, and that was sort of it. That was kind of my
Mm-hmm.
balance, how the equilibrium took place. But you mentioned having kids throughout this whole process, and in your later startups, and I just want people to know that you can, like a better way to sort of characterize, you can have it all. You can find your balance. Maybe the first few years that's hard to achieve, but eventually I believe you can find it. Now, that's my own experience. Were you able to find that balance? Were you able
I
to
was.
get value from other things in your life? And
Yeah.
because it's not, sometimes I don't know if it's worth the cost, if it's out of everything.
Look, I've said that I come from privilege, and that doesn't mean I was rich, because we weren't. But when I talk about privilege, it means um, like my parents instilled in me the belief that I could do it, anything. I knew I could take risks. I was and am blessed with a wife and a partner in my life that allowed me to take the risks and supported me, and still does.
That makes two
Right,
of us.
like that should
Yeah.
probably be the first thing I talk about all the time, because anything I've been able to do, it's because my wife is like, go do it, I believe in you. You got this.
Yeah. Same here. Same
Right.
here. I almost didn't start the company. She's like, what are you doing? You got to go do
Right.
this.
It's why I'm coaching
Yeah.
full time, because my wife would see me after my coaching calls versus my CEO calls, and she would say, oh, you are much happier doing this than you were doing that. You should do more of this.
Yeah.
um, but I think it's really hard to have it all, because
Yeah.
I don't quite know what that means, but I will tell you that and another piece of privilege was I watched my dad be an entrepreneur, and I watched how my dad worked all the time. My dad worked 6 days a week, and late 5 nights of those 6 nights. But one night a week, he would come home early and bring two pizzas and a grinder. That's a sub for people not from Rhode Island. And he and my
Yeah.
brother would sit down and eat every Tuesday night together. And then every Tuesday night from the day I left home till the day my father died, we talked every Tuesday night, or exchanged voicemails or
Yeah.
whatever. I know that when my dad was building his business, he was a doctor. He needed to build his referral base, and he still had to work. So on Saturday mornings, he would take my brother and me, when we were really young, to the hospital cafeteria, and we would sit at the table, and he would network and build a referral base. Right. I know that when I was going across two rivers and whatever, I would take my boys to the diner every Saturday morning. Every Saturday,
Yeah.
rituals. And what my takeaway is, there are rituals. I was
Yes.
out of shape. I was not healthy, but I was doing my business and my family, and not necessarily taking care of myself, as evidenced by the not get out of bed day. So that balance
Yeah.
is really hard. But I think if it is important to you, you can make it happen.
Yeah.
And if you build one of the learnings I had in that crisis moment for me was I was not being a good CEO because I was trying to do it all by myself. I thought I
Yep.
had to be the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I feel like I'm going to will this company to where it needs to get to, instead of, somebody on my team said something to me which I still talk about to this day is like, Mark, employees sleep like kings, right? I wasn't sleeping, right? So I needed to figure out how
Yeah.
to like build a leadership team, how to set a strategy,
Right.
make it clear, how to actually communicate with people about what we needed to do as a business instead of me working really hard and hoping they could read my mind.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah. That's great. That's great parting advice there. No, I appreciate that. And if you're able to sort of accomplish that too, then you are able to invest in those other things in your life as well that you should invest in and provide meaning, more time with family. And but at the same time, I think it's fair to say don't be under any illusions. The startup phase, this and that. There are some compromises, and but as I said before, and just in my own experience, I believe in that journey you can achieve some balance and still work as hard, but you have to let go of some things. And I think sometimes even recognize that you know your performance may suffer a little bit. I mean, maybe if I'm not on the plane as much, maybe the performance suffers a little bit, but it's that's okay as long as it's not at the expense of the whole, the overall goal. And if it's 1 to 2%, and you get 80% back in your family life from that, that's a trade-off you have to make. Early on, it's hard to even think about
yeah,
those things because you're just getting it going, and you got the product market fit. But hey, this has been great. You already touched on your superpower. That's another thing I was going to ask you about because I always am curious, and what is the superpower people believe they had, and how they identify that. And for you was the learning and trying to understand. Which, by the way, circling back
yeah,
to that, the painting back there, the guy in the red shorts, he actually painted it. Is the guy I played volleyball with. I took a picture, and when I was living in Santa Monica, and I commissioned. I knew I'd want that memory,
yeah.
as my was that time and chapter in my life pre-kids closed, and I said, would you paint this thing for me? So now you have a little bit of the story. Be much longer to get into the who all those people are, but we'll have to do that offline another
Can't
time.
wait.
But since you were the first to sort of observe that was where that came
Well,
from.
look, I've
But
connected the Seahawks to
uh,
the Patriots and to your picture. I got it.
oh yeah, this is a previous den that was converted into the family cave and taken over, with everything else as I moved into my office after my startup. So that's how those things go. But hey, listen, it's been a real pleasure, and I could go on with you for a long time in different directions, and that may be a chapter two, and I look forward to participating in whatever you need help
Great.
with, but great to see a person out there like you coaching. I think there's a lot of takeaways. I'm really honored and actually pretty thrilled that this is my first podcast of the year to go out there because it touched across so many different ways to be an entrepreneur and what that looks like. So
Thank you.
thanks
That's kind.
again, and I'm glad our paths have crossed. And have a great rest of the day and rest of the year for
You
that
too,
matter.
pal. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, we'll talk
Bye
again
bye.
soon.